Chapter 9 The Football Game. By mid-September, the Supreme Court had decided that integration in Little Rock should proceed, but the school still didn't open. For a while, it seemed that with the high schools closed, there'd be no football too. But the public outcry was so great, the governor called the superintendent and told him to start up the football program again, school or no school. Daddy nearly turned purple when he heard this news. They'll let their kids go without an education, but Little Rock won't stand for no football? Mother shrugged. She and Judy weren't fans, so they didn't care either way. It was certainly strange that football seemed more important than school, but I was glad they had decided to continue the football program. Friday night football games were something Daddy, David, and I had always done together. Even though he was upset, Daddy called David and asked if he wanted to go to the first game with us. David was actually just down the road at Little Rock University, but he was living in one of the dorms. Mother thought it was a waste of money when he could have stayed at home, but Daddy had had so much fun when he was in college, he wanted his son to have the same experience. David was busy, having fun, I guess, so I'd asked Liz to join us. She was going to meet us at the game, and I was so excited I couldn't help bouncing up and down on the front seat. Elvis's Jailhouse Rock came on the radio, and Daddy winked at me and turned it up louder. Mother was always telling us to turn the music down. Liz was waiting for us by the gate. She yelled, "Marley!" when she saw me and ran to give me a hug. "Hi, Liz," I said and grinned. Daddy held out his hand for Liz to shake. "You must be the history partner," he said. She took his hand and shook it hard. "You must be the English teacher." Daddy laughed. "Did Marley tell you she's going to talk in front of the whole class?" Liz asked. Daddy glanced at me. "No, she didn't." "Liz," I hissed. "You have to tell people," she said. "That way you can't back out." Daddy laughed again. "When Marley's ready to tell me, I'm sure she will," said Daddy. "Now who wants something to eat?" Daddy bought us popcorn and hot dogs for dinner. We gobbled them down and went to find seats in the bleachers. Every time one of the Central players made a good play, we screamed and waved homemade tissue paper pom-poms in the air. Daddy laughed and went off to talk to a colleague from work. JT was sitting a few rows in front of us. He was wearing a Little Rock Tigers varsity jacket, probably Reds, and tufts of his blonde hair were sticking up as if he'd forgotten to comb it. I had an overwhelming urge to go and slick it down. "Staring at the back of his neck isn't going to make him turn around and say hello," said Liz finally. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, come on," Liz said, laughing. "This is the perfect opportunity." I gave her a look. "The perfect opportunity for what?" "Well, you can't just talk to animals forever. We're giving the presentation to our class, which is made up of people." I didn't like where this was going. "And JT is in our class." Before I could protest, Liz pulled me up and practically pushed me down the bleachers. "Go talk to him." I glanced back at her. She grinned and gave me a thumbs up. Maybe I could do this. All I had to do was say hello. I took one step forward, then another. I was wearing my cream sweater and the pleated skirt, which was really cute, and I kicked over someone's Coke bottle, leaned over to try to catch it before the glass broke, slipped, almost fell headfirst down the bleachers, and only managed to save myself by grabbing onto JT's jacket, which I pulled halfway off his shoulders before I finally landed at his feet. "Oh, hi, Marley," JT said. Like girls threw themselves at him every day of the week. Who was I kidding? They probably did. "Enjoying the game?" I nodded and struggled to my feet. "Sit down," JT said. A big burly guy with slicked back hair moved over to make room for me. He was wearing a t-shirt and leather jacket, and I didn't know him from school. He was probably one of Red's friends, and he smelled funny, like a warm beer. I sat down between them. I was so nervous. All I could think about was the smear of ketchup on my cream sweater. It must have happened when I fell. At least Red was playing in the game, so I didn't have to sit next to him. "I'm really glad you stopped by," JT said. "I wanted to ask you something." Finally! After all those math problems, he was going to ask me on a real date. "What?" I said, looking up at him expectantly. It was the first time I had ever spoken to him. I had thought about batting my eyelashes, but he'd probably think I had popcorn or something in my eye. It's about the homework, said JT. The homework? Okay. Maybe he really wanted me to tutor him. I could live with that. Liz would say it was good speaking practice, and you're getting all the problems right. Well, of course I am. I thought that was the point. You can't do that. See, if I get them all right on my homework, but I don't do well on the test, Mr. Harding is going to get suspicious. I need you to throw in a couple of wrong answers here and there. Get more wrong? He could just do the homework himself if he wanted to get more wrong. Do you like the movies, Marley? He looked at me with big smoky blue eyes. I nodded. I do too, JT said, but Mother won't let me go unless I keep my grades up. If I helped him, maybe someday he would ask me to come along. So what do you say? JT cooed. Will you help me out? I nodded again. Great, he said and grinned. See you on Monday. I smiled, stood up, and practically ran back to my seat. At least I didn't trip on anything this time. Liz patted me on the back when I returned. There you go, you did it, she cheered. Liz, I said. All I said was what? That's something. And I nearly fell into his lap. Yes, she said, but you did it so gracefully. We both started to laugh, harder and harder until my stomach started to hurt, and Liz wiped tears from her eyes. You two sound like a pack of hyenas, said Sally. She was walking up the bleachers with her mother behind her. Who are your friends? Mrs. McDaniels asked. You know Marley, said Sally. Yes, of course. And this is Liz. She's new at school. Liz, this is my mom. Sally waved her hand in introduction. Hi, said Liz. Sally's mother gazed at Liz intently for a minute. I've heard a lot about you, Elizabeth. Liz blushed. Sally's been real welcoming to me. Glad to hear it. A woman in a large white hat sitting a few rows behind us waved in our direction. Well, it was nice to meet you, said Mrs. McDaniels. She headed up the bleachers, but Sally sat down with us. What did you tell your mother about me? Asked Liz. I knew her well enough to hear the annoyance in her voice. Nothing but the truth, said Sally. She flipped her hair, then smoothed it down. Does my hair look okay? In a minute, I'm going to go talk to JT. Oh, said Liz casually. Marley already did that. Sally turned as red as the ketchup on my sweater, and I had to force myself not to laugh again. It was dark when we drove home. You know, Daddy said quietly, I like that Liz girl. Me too. Are you... He paused. Are you really going to speak during that presentation? I think so, I said. Daddy patted me on the shoulder, and when I glanced at him, I could see the pride in his eyes. Chapter 10. Behind the Grin. Mother and Daddy started arguing again on Sunday. Mother was frying hamburgers on the stove when she said to Daddy, States do have rights, you know. Those politicians in Washington can't be telling us how to run our schools. Daddy bit his lip. He was grating carrots so briskly I was afraid he would find fingers in the salad. The schools have already been closed almost 2 weeks. The students are the ones who are suffering. If the governor gives in, what's next? Mother asked. Negroes at the swimming pool? Daddy shrugged. They're already sitting at the front of the bus, and you still manage to find a seat. Richard! It's not right to keep the schools closed, Maureen, and you know it. At that moment, the back door flew open and David burst in. I squealed and dropped the bowl of potatoes I was mashing. You came home! Hi, Marley, said David, and he gave me such a big hug. He picked me up off the ground. David always wore a dazzling smile, which transformed him from a nice-looking guy into a movie star. Class is going well? Asked Daddy. Never better, said David. But his eye twitched just like Daddy's did when he was lying. He popped a tomato from the salad into his mouth. Where's Judy? Hi, David, said Judy, coming into the room. Hey, sis, David grinned. Wanted to tell you the university's going to offer correspondence classes to all the kids without school. He took a spoon and swiped a bit of mashed potatoes. Needs more salt, he told me. Then to Judy, "Thought you might be interested." "Correspondence classes?" asked Judy. "Yeah," said David. "They give you a list of assignments and you send your work in. The professor grades them and sends you the test, and you send it back and who's going to help me if I don't understand something?" asked Judy. "I can help you, sweetie," said Mother. "Yeah, and if it's English or history, but what if it's chemistry?" "If it's chemistry, I'm sure one of my colleagues in the science department would be glad to help you. In fact, maybe we could organize study groups for you and Margaret, at least until—" "And Marley could help you with the math," David teased. "Wonderful," said Judy as she carried the plates into the dining room. "I get to be tutored by my mother and my little sister." Daddy laughed. It was a great dinner, even if the burgers were dry and the potatoes were salty, and the salad didn't have any tomatoes because David had swiped them all. The whole family was together, and for an hour, that was enough. After dinner, I pulled David into my room. "So how's it really going?" I asked. "What?" "Your classes." "Oh, great." David picked at a piece of lint on his sweater. "Come on, David." "What?" "I can tell you're lying." He looked around, though there was no one else in the room with us. Then he sighed and sat down on the bed. "Promise you won't tell Mother and Daddy?" "Course not." "It's awful. All those math classes I signed up for, well, I don't have the foggiest idea what's going on. The professor's talking in the lecture hall, and it's like he's speaking another language." That sounded awful. I mean, David has never been as naturally good at math as me. Not bragging, it's just a fact. But we'd had so much fun talking about all the things we were going to invent together. He was the one who'd explain what an engineer was and how they built things like spaceships and satellites. David shook his head. "If you were there, I bet you'd understand." "Me?" I asked. "No way." "Yeah, Marley, I think you would." Then we heard Daddy calling, and David stood up. "Bye, sis," he said. "It's up to you now to beat those Soviets." He pasted his usual grin back on. "Now remember, not a word to Mother." I nodded. That night I lay in bed, wondering how many other times David had grinned and fooled me too, even though he felt awful inside. The idea that my big brother sometimes felt not good enough was strange and a bit scary. But the idea that he thought I'd be able to do those math classes, maybe work on spaceships someday, well, that made me feel awful good.